When the phrase Korean alcohol is mentioned, for better or for worse, the first thing that will come to many people's mind will be those ubiquitous green bottles of soju that can be found in all Korean convenience stores and local restaurants. But dig a little deeper and one will quickly uncover a diverse world of traditional spirits and wines that Korea has to offer. Our guest today for Touch Basin's Hole is an American who has taken upon himself to explore that world. With traditional Korean alcohol sommelier qualifications under his belt, he is helping both foreigners and Koreans discover more about Korean alcohol. His name is Dustin Wessa, and he has joined us in the studio now. Hello and welcome to the show.
That was quite the introduction. Thank you.
Okay, so I understand you originally came to Korea as a student.
Yep.
That was about 15 years ago, I think.
I would say about 15 years. I stopped counting because I'm kind of hoping that I stop aging.
Okay, so you've been in Korea for a long time, we should say, and then you later became a chef before you became a sommelier. So how did that journey happen? What brought you to Korea and how did you end up becoming a chef?
I came here to study originally. I think I was originally interested in language and history. And, well, I mean, obviously the best place to study Korean language and history is not... it might be LA. No, I'm just kidding.
Of course it's in Korea.
It's obviously here. So I wrote a program, flew over, got a professor to sign off on kind of the more specific things I was interested in, and started studying here. And I've always been interested in kind of wild ingredients. And that's kind of what, like... wild ingredients, fermentation, and then just cooking at home for a couple years, and then kind of branched off and said, hey, let's do it. Let's try a restaurant. And so I take the term chef, like we throw that around like, and I wouldn't call myself a chef. I would say I cook moderately well. And
it was Korean food you were cooking?
I cook Korean food at home. My restaurant, the first restaurant I did when I was the chef owner was actually a skewer place. That was before skewers were kind of, and before Gyeongnidan existed for that matter. So that was the first place. And
then you became interested in Korean alcohols? Is that something that came naturally? What happened there?
Well, yeah, I mean... You can work in a restaurant and you sip on your wines and you have your days off. You work every day. It doesn't matter. I mean, I'm sure you've heard stories about life in the service industry. And even on your off days, you sip on your champagne and then you look at the bill at the end of the month and you go, my off days are more my profit margin. So I asked a friend of mine who happened to be brewing alcohol at the time with a really small group called Mamas and the Papas and two foreigners. And I said, hey, teach me how to just make a basic makgeolli if you could. And just it's kind of started there and it just became...
So you made it yourself?
Yeah. That was I think the first time I had proper makgeolli. I don't know if... I guess I'd have to make the recipe again to see if I still thought that, but...
Sure. Then enjoying alcohol and then making makgeolli is one thing, but then to really... go into that as a career to become a sommelier in Korean traditional alcohol is something quite different. How did you make that transition?
I just finished up the second restaurant project that I was working on, and I had been doing a few pop-ups around the city, and I had this one pop-up, and my sous chef, he said, I want to be a model. I'm sorry, chef, I can't come to help you with the service tomorrow. How much are they paying you? He said, $400. I said, I'll pay you $400. He said, no, I'm going to be a model. So I'm left without staff. Okay. I put out an SOS to a few people I knew in the industry, and they said, there's someone I know that's kind of similar to you. He does his own foraging. He's interested in fermentation, Korean ingredients. And it happened to be Joseph Ligerwood, who has a vet now. And this was prior to opening his restaurant, and we ran one service together. And he said, I'd love to work with you. I said, great, let's cook together. He said, no, I just watched you cook. You're definitely not cooking with me. He's Michelin starred, right?
Wow.
And I said, okay, fair enough. So what do you want from me? And he said, your personality, your interest, your level of nerding out. We need you in the hall. We need you front of house. And I know that you're studying to become a sommelier. If you get that certification and we can just jump off the deep end together, let's start a project. So that's how I made the transition from back of house to front of house, from kitchen to service.
And that sommelier certification was for Korean traditional alcohol?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. What is it about Korean alcohol that you enjoy, that drew you in?
Well, I mean, you can make it at home. right? And in every house has rice, every house has water, and then you can order nuruk. That's what we're using to make Korean alcohol. So if you want to take a crack at it, you can go ahead and just order some nuruk and do it with ingredients in your place. And that's one appeal. Just kind of for we're in this DIY, do it yourself. You know, you want to try things, new experiences. So, and whether it turns out well or not, I guarantee, even if your makgeolli is not the best makgeolli in the world, you're not going to end up poisoning yourself. You'll be fine.
Right. Okay.
So there's that appeal, and there's also the appeal that once you start to practice, you can actually choose if you like something kind of juicy sweet, or you like something off dry, or you like something woody and earthy and dry. You can kind of hone in on those and fine tune your own preferences right there. And I mean, there's no better gift, right?
To be a Korean traditional alcohol sommelier, do you need to make your own alcohol then? Is that part of the process?
No, that's most certainly. You don't have to. And it's more of a hobby. The somm thing is, and especially if we could talk about it for a second, a lot of times people say the somm certification, how difficult was that for you?
Sure.
Is it impossible? Is it near impossible? It's not. And there are a lot of places where you can kind of just get your toe wet, just a 3-month course. And that's a good introduction. You don't have to make your own booze. You don't have to be accustomed with the service industry or fine dining. It's about somms across the world. They find their own niches. If you want to be in a 5-star hotel, you can. If you want to nerd out in books and write articles, you can. If you want to sit there on a tasting panel and rate and categorize alcohols, you can. You have to have the liver for it, mind you. But there are a lot of realms and a lot of different facets to work in after you get your certification.
So for yourself, though, with that certification and as a somm, what do you do? What does your day-to-day look like?
I do a little bit of everything. I think I woke up this morning. My landlord said the weeds in the yard are out of control, so I went down to my front yard and I looked around and I said, okay, there's yogi. And yogi is used traditionally to make nuruk. If you spin it in a blender.
Yeah.
I said, okay, we got enzymes. So I made some yogi jip, and then I plan on making nuruk tomorrow. I squeezed out two 10-liter batches of what is makgeolli now, but will be cheongju in about a month, and then kind of battened down a still that I can borrow, so I can run a batch of soju next week, and then studied for a while and played some phone games. I think I had a ramen in there somewhere.
I understand you do other things as well. You help restaurants build their wine lists that involve Korean traditional wines, all that thing. Korean traditional wine is growing, isn't it? The interest in it, both here in Korea and overseas.
Korea is fast. You know that. Korea is so fast. We had a 100-year hiatus, sure. There were a couple disturbances in the fabric of what Seoul was for thousands of years in the last 100 years, but Korea is fast. I mean, it's just a blip on the map. And as soon as there's interest, and especially if there's interest in something that's worth your while in quality, the curiosity there and the appetite for new experiences is just, it's voracious. And you've seen the swing up in the last 2 years, the interest level in Seoul in general. I mean, before, if you found a place that had dongdongju, you called your buddies. You're just like, I found the dongdongju place, and it's like some basement in Hongdae. They're actually sprinkling rice on the top of the makgeolli or something like that, charging twice as much. But there's actually a lot of really nice alcohol, and there are a lot of places now that have a very, very elaborate collection. I mean, we're talking 300, 400 different types of sur, and you can just you can go to Myeongdong, and there's 2 places that have that spread where you can taste through a menu. So it's very quick here.
Sure, even in department stores nowadays, you get traditional Korean wine corners where there's different brands and different types that are presented in nice bottles, that look like it could be somewhere in the West as well, serving whiskey. On that note, though, from what you talk about Korean alcohol, you talk about making it yourself, you talk about local breweries, things like that. How does that work then for growing traditional wine, Korean wine, overseas and making it something which can be more established going forward?
I don't know if we have time for this question, but I'll try and get on it very quickly. There are two ways, in my professional opinion, to go about it. Standardization is not a realistic option for Sur, because we're still brewing with wild yeasts. You take a nuruk, and if you were to look at that on a microorganism through a microscope, right, and then break down if it's what percentage white yeast to gold yeast to red yeast to black to what, it would be impossible to we're not quite there yet. So what I've been saying. Up until now, I've been saying, yes, we need to standardize everything, make sure that everything is exactly the same. And that's a good idea when you want to go abroad. But I think what we need to do in Korea right now, for the places that are very passionate about presenting using their strains of rice, the nuruk that they made, we just go the wine way with it, slap a vintage on there. This is the 2000, and then break it down even further. This is 2008 summer, right? This is 2008 winter, because the variations in the temperatures and what's possible within the seasons is actually, you'd be surprised. It's quite dramatic.
It's really interesting. So rather than go down the whiskey routes, go down the wine routes.
Right.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. I feel like there's so much more I could talk about with you, but we are running out of time. For you personally, what's next for you? What do you want to do with your interest in Korean traditional wines?
Keep pushing, so sip, sip, sip. You know, I brought some for us to take a taste of just in case. We're at 11 minutes, 40 seconds. You said 12 minutes. Let's go.
I'm not sure we can do that on air. I'm not sure whether that would be safe for me. But that sounds... I'd be definitely willing to try it later, maybe after the show is over.
I won't tell anyone. We're definitely not tasting this after the show. 57, 58, 59,
okay,
12.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing with us your story, as well as introducing us to the world of Korean traditional alcohol. We've been speaking with Dustin Wessa, a traditional Korean alcohol sommelier here in Seoul. Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.